So we're going to call this meeting to order. And we did hear from Mark that he may not be able to attend, and Matt did indicate he would be coming, so I'm sure he'll pop in at any minute. And we will hand this right off to Evan to give his presentation.
All right, thank you. All right, and everybody can see that PowerPoint? Great. So these are our 5-year projections. We've been working on them for about the last year. The school department has been creating their own. And one thing I'd like to share at the beginning of this is that the school department numbers in here are our calculations based on typical scaling, but we will be having some more refined numbers from Jay moving forward. So they're not included in this yet. Okay. So just a quick disclaimer of what this presentation is. So we've taken a snapshot in time. It's an extension of a living document, and I'll show you that document at the end. We anticipate that this is going to have to be flexible with changes in the municipal environment. So things are going to change. This PowerPoint is not just, I gave you the data and that's what I expect it to be forever. We've based it on historic trends and relevant present day data. We did not use any of the previous administration's forecasts. We did all of this from historic data that was what was part of our Schedule A, which is what's uploaded to the Department of Revenue. So we went back through all of that data. And then I'll show you as an example of a tool which we can run scenarios. So we can change numbers in this document that we've created to see what happens if something changes in the environment. So again, it's not the end all be all, and it's not the entirety of the data. We did not use best guess or pie in the sky accounting. As I said, we use this directly from what DOR has on record. So before we see numbers, let's talk about baseline assumptions. So these are the assumptions that we use to get the baseline data for the budget that we believe is going to be stable. So we used new growth projections. So for Grafton, usually they're between 280 and 500. We have been averaging well north of 800,000. We used 800,000 in our fiscal 23 budget. And all of the numbers we'll talk about tonight presume that new growth is pegged at 800,000. We used our debt exclusions of 4 million. We have capital override exclusions recently, which were 2.3 million, and operating budget overrides for 2015 for 2 million and 2021 for 3.2. We currently have a split tax rate with a consistent shift to the CIP, which is commercial personal property, basically, where we inventory property of a business. That's important. I don't see Grafton in our lifetime shifting away from the split tax rate. I think that would be pretty extraordinary because we are a 90-10 community. So we're about 90% residential, 10% commercial, industrial, and that would shift a great deal of the burden to those businesses, which would likely make them not want to stay in Grafton. So our assumptions on state aid and offsets, Chapter 70, so the direct aid goes to the regional school district. We do get about $2.6 million in Chapter 70, which is about 8.3% of all the aid that we receive. The UGA, as it's called, is the unrestricted government aid. And we estimated it at about 1.7 million, and we built in a 1.5 to 2% per year increase. They have been doing better under the Baker administration. We've been up in the threes quite frequently. However, we don't know what will happen with this upcoming election, and maybe that gets better, maybe that gets worse, but we're conservative at about 2%. Our local receipts are usually, yes, Angelina, you're muted.
Sorry, can we go back to the last slide? So this first part with the new growth projections, you said you're using 800 this year and 800 used throughout the projections? Is that what you
Yep.
said?
So every year for the next 5 years, we pegged it at 800,000.
Okay. So what is the principal assessor? What does that part mean? That
So
those
a
are
principal
his-
assessor is the assessor's office in town.
Mhm.
That's our head assessor. And so she's responsible for providing new growth projection based on what we've seen for building and what we've seen for things that we're able to pick up in the tax rate, right? Sheds, garages, pools, whatever.
Mhm.
And so she looks at what the trends are going back, say, usually 3 to 5 years, and also what the trends are in other communities. So, if Grafton's the only place that's picking up sheds, I don't know, let's just use that as an example. It's probably not a good one, but let's go with sheds. If we're the only community having that, then it probably means that we haven't been assessing things properly and we're catching up with people that built sheds without a permit and they're over a certain square footage. But if everybody's doing that, then there's probably, a good market for sheds. So you can kind of bank on that for the foreseeable future. So you're really using market trend data to show where we think we're going to be.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So the 800 is more based on the market trend, is what you're saying?
Yep. Yeah,
Versus,
exactly. And what we think we can pick up, right? So so new growth is basically we assessed the town of Grafton at this much last year, and we believe that its value is going to rise to this much. And that will be done because people add things, new buildings, new additions, whatever. But also because we're projecting that the town will continue to grow at that rate.
okay,
So,
thank you.
yes. All right. So local receipts are usually 12% at 4.5 million. We have one retail cannabis shop. 2 others are in progress. Motor vehicle excise tax is the largest receipt, followed by departmental permits. And we have a very small meals tax. So you'll often hear town administrators talk about whether the meals tax is like we're doing really well on meals tax or we're not doing well on meals tax. It's not significant enough, in my opinion, that if we fluctuated by 20%, you're not probably feeling that in the overall budget, right? That's not going to cause us any major harm. Free cash certifications are usually around 2 million or 3% of the total budget, which is about where we want to be. We use 1.2 to 1.7 million annually, and our annual overlay estimate is 0.7% of the tax levy. If you're not familiar with overlay is typically what you use to cover refunds and abatements, right? So you hold that money to the side so that when you have like your senior abatements or I sold my car and you have to give me that money back and all of that stuff, that's what that covers.
Evan, any
Yes.
idea how much is in that overlay account at this point?
I think that it's in my other spreadsheet. I don't have that top of mind.
Okay.
We've been maintaining, this is going to be anecdotal, but a healthy balance. We haven't been close to depleting it any year. So
Yeah, no, that's one that typically builds. And
Yep,
then when we
correct.
end up with a few $100,000, we'll transfer it somewhere else.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering where we're at because I don't
So-
think that's been utilized for some time.
yes, that's a practice that I personally don't like.
I'm with you.
I try to keep it at a stable amount, and we can, if I don't have that data right here, I can send that out to everybody. But I typically like to hold it steady with what our historic values are. Some towns use it pretty much as a savings account.
Yep.
It's like a kitty, it builds up over the year and nobody pays
Right.
attention. And you say, "Oh, you want that park? Look at this money I just found."
Exactly.
I don't budget that way.
I'm with you on that. On the other side, historically, the new growth number was always pretty significantly underestimated in terms of forecasting and budgeting. So it was this weird, I'm going to keep all this stuff in my back pocket kind of approach rather than, trying to be more aligned with historical norms and keep things even so that it's all basically on the table every year.
Right.
To the best of our ability. So I like the approach where we try to be as accurate as possible, understanding that there's going to be fluctuations, of course. But
Right. And there's always going to be in the overlay, there's always going to be some fudge because you always want to be to the good.
of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we wind up being 50,000 over in any fiscal year, that's okay.
Yeah.
And we might not adjust it down for the next year because might want to build a little bit of reserve there, but we don't really want to get to the point where you have $300,000-$400,000 in there that you can then use as found money. Because it really, you should have caught it before it got to that level.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, an enterprise fund. So we really have one enterprise fund that is a direct input here, which is our sewer fund, and we use those receipts and indirect costs are paid out of that for the services they get from the municipality. Okay, we'll move into expenditures quickly here. So our personnel expenses, we've built a 2.4% increase into the town, excluding education. We have two unions on our side of the house, that's GMEA and Grafton Police Alliance. And we have a pressure to increase public staffing in the public safety sector due to our growing population. Our largest expense segment is education, which is not atypical for the state of Massachusetts at 58.5%. Most towns are right around 60%. Grafton plans to utilize our road and capital stabilization funds to reduce the backlog of large projects. So we have a whole bunch of catching up to do from our asphalt management plan, as well as our equipment type capital expenses. We use the fiscal 23 budget a little more heavy in our projections because that we feel it represents the normalized post-COVID budget. And then that says Duxville Sewer again. I don't know why that's in there twice. We don't need that. Okay. Okay, everybody knows we have K through 12 here in Grafton, and we have BVT. Our BVT assessment, if you don't realize this, has a debt exclusion in it, a debt service in it, which I think rolls out in, I think it's 7 years, if I remember correctly. So we have pretty decent amount of debt out there when our debt service is about $5 million annually. However, debt service as a percentage of budget has been declining. We're at about 9. We were at about 9% in 2017. I do want to share with you, we just signed a contract for another new piece of software called Debt Book. So Grafton has a historically convoluted tracking for debt. It is really just like this big lump. And if you asked me at any given time what anything has left on it, it's going to be different number in 3 different spots, which is not great. And so we've just redone our chart of accounts in the accounting software. We've gotten that to a stable position. So now we're going to move on and do the same thing with debt. So we will have a debt book that you can track every single aspect of that debt, future calculations, and all the rest of it. It's going to be a game changer as far as debt goes for the town of Grafton. So really excited about that. All right. Got off track on my debt. Thing's really cool. You're gonna love it. Okay, so we have capital stabilization here, obviously free cash and debt. Our total capital spend is usually greater than 1.5 million. We are currently, actually tomorrow morning, we have a capital summit. What we're trying to do is start to plateau our capital so that year 1 and year 2 look very similar to year 4 and year 5. And so that we're finding our norm. It's a little hard because we have a lot of backlog stuff. And we have a differing opinion of what capital is. And so that's really the challenge, is refining what we're considering capital and how we're viewing what goes onto this list. So that'll be part of the lift for tomorrow. Matt?
So who has differing views of capital? I'm just curious about that.
So I would say almost everyone.
Okay.
And so this is what I'll say. We have a really good understanding that capital is like your department's car. It is your department's lawnmower, your tractor, your dump truck, whatever it is. We have no understanding of facilities. We're
Okay.
not capturing any of that data in any real meaningful way. And we also, we
Are you talking about roofs, building envelopes, parking lots?
HVAC, water heaters, all your stuff that only lasts 20 years or 30 years, and it shows up nowhere until it's a catastrophe. So we need to be inventorying those things, and that's what we started in the last 2 weeks. We've been working on our asset inventory, and then so tomorrow part of my plan for our capital summit is to talk about here's our asset inventory, and it's really good work, and it's light years ahead of where we just were. But what about your air conditioning system? Like where does that? Where is the trailer that your equipment gets moved on? Because that's nowhere. They don't last. They last a long time, but they don't last forever.
Yeah.
And so what winds up happening is, we need 2 lawnmowers, and that's been on the capital plan, and we know we need those 2 lawnmowers. And hey, while we're at it, let's get a new trailer. Well, that new trailer's nowhere. Where is that? What's the value of that? And so we need to kind of drill down on some of those topics.
Got it.
So were those things never capitalized in the first place, or they were like capitalized and fully depreciated and now they're out of?
Yeah, they only really show up on our insurance roster.
Okay.
I don't see them anywhere else. And I don't, Colleen, you had redone a lot of the CIPC stuff, and Matt, I know you did too, and I don't think you'd see any of that kind of smaller stuff.
You wouldn't. And we don't do depreciation either, right?
Right. It's a little bit different for us. So because we're using the asset to provide a service, we don't really depreciate the value. Because it's not the ROI is different, right? We're doing a little different. That's a great point, because I actually have a slide in my presentation tomorrow to talk about depreciated value and asset value, and how private sector and public sector are different.
So the other thing that's, I think, relevant in this area, I've been advocating strongly for the past couple of years for the select board to consider, instead of just raising the same amount for our stabilization accounts, this would be for roads and for municipal capital stabilization. That would be everything except roads. We have the ability to not only raise the 1.5 million for roads and 800K for other capital stabilization. We have the ability on a yearly basis to consider increasing that by 2.5%. And I've been advocating to smooth out the tax rate so that we don't in 10 years end up in a situation where we're looking at another override for roads and capital, that we consider on a yearly basis increasing those stabilization amounts that we raise by up to 2.5%. So the select board hasn't had its discussion about that yet, but I think that's an important thing that I'd like to see myself changing. That will help. I think, we're always trying to smooth the budget so that there's no surprises, and so that we're kind of keeping up with the cost drivers. And of course, in the area of capital, we're continuing to develop and build new roads that we're responsible for, new sidewalks. The select board has a goal to try to deliver more sidewalks over time with our Complete Streets program and all that. And, all of that needs maintenance in addition to the growing fleet of trucks and cars and additional buildings and all that kind of stuff. So that list isn't static. It continues to grow as the town gets bigger. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the capital stabilization is raised outside of the 2.5%,
Correct.
Yep.
and that's done yearly when we do the budget. Is that what it is?
It's the same as the road stabilization.
Right. So essentially what we do is in October, the select board votes to basically keep raising that money as part of the override. And then that gets confirmed via our town meeting articles later on in May.
So what happens once the override is gone?
There is no, so these are perpetual overrides. So there's two different ways to do an override, right? One is an override that's perpetual. So you raise 1.5 million plus 2.5% forever.
Okay.
And that's what Grafton voted to do. There's another mechanism called a debt exclusion. And a debt exclusion has a lifespan, right? So debt exclusion is, I'm going to put a new roof on that building for $100,000. I'm going to amortize it over 10 years. And once that note is paid off, that debt exclusion no longer exists. It comes right off of your levy limit. And that's not in this case what Grafton did with those stabilization accounts.
And just to add on to what Matt was saying, the board actually did put a policy together so that each year that conversation happens and we can decide if it's a good year to add on that 2.5% or if it's not, and how to do that.
Right. Okay. All right, I'm going to jump on here. So risk management. So we have a pretty massive insurance policy. That's really has a modest increase, and it has been fairly stable, say in the last 10 years with Maya. They do a pretty good job of holding us steady. Unemployment compensation, we are level, we've been level going back 5 years or more. And our workers' comp, we fund based on what our insurance company tells us our mod rate is doing and what we need to do to make sure that we're adequately covering. All right, so employee benefits. So health insurance costs are projected via purchasing group, which is it's our consultant. We are looking currently at maybe a change coming down the road in health insurance that hopefully nets us some more stability. Life insurance, we're flat. Medicaid is a 3%, or Medicare, excuse me, is a 3% annual increase. And our retirement assessments are all Worcester County. So we don't have the ability to really change any of that. State assessments, our largest charges are for tuition assessments, and our estimate, all our state assessments are based on our cherry sheet reporting. Other amounts, cherry sheet offsets for the library and school choice receiving tuition, and our overlay is variable based on budgetary constraints, which is partially true. Okay, so other financial uses for our expenditures, we have appropriations, which are not line item transfers made in the current fiscal year, but reported on the subsequent fiscal year recap. So this is something that we've been doing since Mary and I took over, and this is what we do kind of in the background with FinCom and the select board. Not really in the background. We do all this work in the background, and then you guys vote it to move that money around. We have very modest, it says modest transfers. I would call it very modest transfers in OPEB. We are way behind. And so we're currently trying to build that up over the years to kind of get some money shuffled into there. And we have no regular transfers into the stabilization fund, which is something we're also hoping to start to correct in concert with our stabilization fund policy. And sewer enterprise pays for direct and indirect expenses on its own. You always want to be a sewer director because they always have money. They always do. It's a good gig.
Can I ask about the OPEB thing?
Yes.
Real quick.
Sure.
So that's the money that we have to put aside for in case the town goes bankrupt. Is that what that is?
Yes-ish. We are responsible for retiree benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And we pay a percentage of those, right? And so
Yeah.
in order to, in theory, build up enough money so that your annual, let's call it the interest that comes off of your investment
Mhm.
covers your annual nut for retirees, we need to have whatever it is. I'm blanking right now, but I think it's like $83 million. Right? That's what the state assessment is. And right now we have, I think I just got it up to about 310,000. So, we're right there.
I mean, but why would having $83 million in cash just in case doesn't seem to make any sense.
Well, it's not really just in case, it's so that you create a trust that is self-sustaining to cover your retiree benefits, right? Other post-employment benefits. So, I don't know that it's really designed for if the town goes into receivership or any of that. It's really so that you're not using tax dollars every year to cover that. You're using your trust dollars to cover that.
But we are currently paying
we pay all those
retiree benefits, right?
Yep.
And we're budgeting for it and paying
Right.
for it as a town. So like just intellectually, like, I don't even know, having $83 million in cash sitting in an account doesn't make sense for
Well,
like what.
Right. So let's say we have another 2008 bubble, right? And so what the state's aim is with this OPEB is that you have money in the bank that is funding your other post-employment benefits in perpetuity by itself. And you're able to take those fluctuation hits and not, say, bankrupt your healthcare system or whatever else you have in place. I mean, that's really the idea of it. I'm not saying I agree with it.
I know. It seems like a very drastic for all of the towns to have all of this money set aside. Like it's kind of feels like an insurance thing. Like insurance could take care of something like this. Like everybody pools their money, and then when I don't know. This just
it's the same idea with a pension, right?
Yeah.
So you're supposed to build up the pension fund so that your then contributions and interest will cover all the people that have already retired, right? That's
right. I know you're also supposed to save for your kids to go to college and be able to pay for that with cash. Like, I mean, it's like the Wizard of Oz over here. Like nobody, I don't know. It's an awful lot of money for the town to put aside. I know you have to do what you have to do, but it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, there's very, very few, if any, towns that have actually met their actual commitment. And where they have, they've had some remarkable, like, fortune financially where they've made a decision to sort of put all that money in. But that's never happened for Grafton.
Shrewsbury's fully funded.
One of the reasons that we would do it, not the main reason, but it's about sustainability, but it shows up in our bonds ratings every time.
And we're doing what we have to have the bond rating that we have, right? Like
so we've done everything we can, almost everything we can do to have a better bond rating than we have. And this is always going to hang over our head until we tackle it.
Find $83 million.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
They just want to see regular contributions and some kind of plan.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's,
I did tell them that I have started $50,000 a year, and the S&P guy did chuckle. So he was real happy to see that progress that I got going on there.
Well, the funny thing is, when I first looked at it, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, Grafton's nut was around 55 or 60. So it's up to 80 now. So the extra 50 grand a year.
Hey, we're getting there one step at a time. So the town, again, this is all stuff that you already know. This presentation is geared for pretty much everybody that might have questions about 5-year forecasts. So we vote annually at town meeting for revolving accounts. That's Mass General Law and CPA funds. So essentially, our revolving accounts, they're by law, they have to be done as a bylaw now through the state system. And we use those to pay for services that are like self-funding, like our rec and a whole bunch of other smaller ones, like Council on Aging has one, things like that. So that you can use some user fees to cover programming. And everybody, so CPA is the Community Preservation Act, overseen by CPC. And it's a separate fund and separate part of the property tax levy. In 2014, you guys had voted in favor of an override to fund a special purpose stabilization fund for municipal roads. 2021, capital stabilization. Both allow for an override without appropriation, which we just discussed, and as much as 2.5% over the prior fiscal year. And so the board will have that in front of them in October. Okay, now we'll get into some actual numbers. So as you can see, we have our general fund revenue numbers, and these, excuse me, so I just got to get this out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. These numbers are based upon all of the assumptions that we just talked about. So you can see our property tax levy has a consistent growth across fiscal 23 to fiscal 28, ending up with a property tax levy of somewhere around $65.5 million. Our cherry sheet state aid, we project, going from what we have now at 15.3 to about 17.3 in fiscal 28. Our estimated local receipts and offset receipts stay relatively flat. And we talked about that a little bit. And so maybe a $400,000 increase there over the 5 years. Available funds and other sources. These are where your bonds hit and your paying off of bonds. When a bond rolls off, that frees up your available funds because your levy limit has been changed. Enterprise for indirect costs, again, stays pretty flat. So this is what our general fund expenditures look like with $800,000 of new growth factored in. And you can see that our general fund surplus, which is at the bottom, kind of steadily grows over time. That is probably a little bit of an exaggeration given Grafton's history, although we are really trying hard, both Jay, myself, Nita, and Mary are trying very hard to create a levy capacity gap so that we have a security net. And I think you can see that throughout our projections. So I won't go through all of the numbers. These are all based on our standard growth over the 5 years previous to this data. And this is our grand total. And again, this is an amalgamation of what was on the other page. I know you had seen this earlier, so I'm going to jump to this next page because I think this is what people talk about all the time. This is your excess levy capacity or override remainder. I call it that when I started and was doing all the meetings with you folks, and you were talking about how much of the override is left. It was super confusing. I thought that you had done a one-time override and had like a piggy bank that you squirreled money away into and you were shuffling money out. But what you're really talking about is levy capacity. And so you did an override, it gave you some levy capacity, and now it's our job to try to make that levy capacity last for as long as possible. And so in our fiscal 24, and in 23, we were able to retain a capacity of about 1.1 million. I think it'll actually be higher than that with our new growth number. And then you can see if all things remain the same, we slowly titrate down until, fiscal 28, we have a little bit of a problem. We're down to 107,000. Now, again, this is all things remaining equal. We do nothing different to change any of these outcomes. New growth stays exactly where it is. It's always 800,000. The school department grows at a consistent rate. The municipal government grows at its consistent rate. There are things that we can do that will hopefully make this chart less of a step down and more of a gradual decrease over time, if not trying to get it as level as possible. And I truly believe that fiscal 28 is not as bad as it looks on this initial projection. Any questions about the levy capacity?
Not about the levy capacity, but you work really closely with the schools about this. And I was curious about the fire department and how, if any of consideration had been made about their potential budget impacts.
So they're pretty much status quo in this. And the reason is that we don't even know what we don't know at this point.
Right.
Chief Matthews still assessing what he has inherited. And so until we can get our arms around that, we're not really, we're counting on kind of consistent growth, but nothing like if you wanted to go to a full-time fire department or you did, like we've not captured that in any way. And I think that if we were to do that or something like that, that's when we would talk about an override that's department related, right? So that it stays outside of your levy capacity. Unless, we do better than we're projecting and can absorb it. That's obviously the better outcome. We have been working very closely, Jay and I particularly, and Anita and Mary. I want to take all the credit, but we've been working really closely to try to avoid debt when we can, so that we can let some of this debt roll off, which will then help with our levy capacity issue. You always need debt. Debt is always going to be on the books. We need to fund things through bonds, and that's probably always going to be the case. But if we can retain some of that borrowing capacity as excess levy capacity, it just helps us kick that can down the road farther and farther. Which is why we did the $2.5 million worth of ARPA work in the schools. That was going to be a bond you were going to be doing this year. And we were able to avoid that altogether.
Nice.
I know it seems like a long time from now, but the next sort of big bond that rolls off is the high school, and I think that's 2032.
Right.
So, we're already in fiscal 23. So if we can get, not a whole lot of debt exclusions between now and then, we'll be in good shape to be able to absorb additional, things like Evan was just talking about at that point.
So according to this, it would look like if everything stayed the same, we would need another override in 29 to.
Yep,
Okay.
roughly. Yep.
Yep.
But
So we could stretch this to 32 and then the high school rolls off and maybe we'd be able to.
Yep.
Not.
And that might kick the can down the road longer. And that presumes, not that I have any foreshadowing, but that presumes that by 2032, the school department is not looking to renovate and or build a new building, which.
Yeah. I mean, how old is the middle school? That was with the 50s.
I don't know the middle school. The elementary schools to me they're pretty rough.
Like North Street. Oh yeah, the little elementary schools. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like walking into 1965.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's cool at this point again. But at some point, I was the town's going to have that conversation at some point. And I don't want to peg all of our hopes on high school debt rolling off and not, having to deal with other school infrastructure. Because honestly, I think that's the likely scenario that happens towards 2032. And I'm not on the school committee. Jay and I have not had that conversation. I'm just going based on what my experience has been in other towns, that when school debt rolls off, usually it's time to build another school.
Yeah.
I would imagine those would be,
renovation or something.
wouldn't those be cheaper though than a high school? Like they're definitely smaller schools.
By 2032, I would doubt it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's these school building projects are unbelievable. Tons of dollars.
Getting more expensive every year.
We open more pot shops or something.
I'll work on it.
I think the main thing is we just need to get away from this. For years and years, we heard we're almost done, and it's a fantasy. You're never done.
Right.
And once you're done with that set of schools and you're paying those bonds off, now you've got to build another fire station because, we've done 2 or 3 renovations of station 2 and it just doesn't work anymore and whatever. So there's always something. At some point, the municipal building's going to be old enough, so it needs to be rebuilt. There's always something.
Yeah, that is the truth. And I think as long as, part of our job is to keep talking about that so that people understand that, again, school committee has not talked about this, Jay's not talking about this, but, we need a new elementary school in 2032. Well, of course you do, because they were 1960s built. Like, that's how long they last. It is what it is. But I think people have this idea that these things are static, and they're not. As soon as you build it, it starts falling apart. And at a certain point, you patch it as much as you can and you maintain it as best you can. And at a certain point, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. No, this is fantastic. I think the messaging has to be consistent and it has to be constant about what's happening, and the transparency that you guys are providing is fantastic. At least is furthering the conversation, and it's not telling people like, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Right.
That never turns out well.
It doesn't.
Fine till it's not. And then
Right.
all of a sudden everybody's surprised, and that's not good for any of us. So.
Right. Agreed. So for variable considerations, so new growth, we could have a big commercial development come in, which changes our new growth number dramatically. We have a lot of residential pressure right now. What happens with the housing market could change drastically what our new growth numbers look like. Chapter 70 had that refresh. That's worked out really well for Grafton. I don't anticipate that that's going to go down, but are there other gains that we make in the Chapter 70 formula? Borrowing, as I said, the school department and the municipality or the town side are actively trying to avoid borrowing. But, we're not going to be able to do that for everything. Something's going to come up at some point. And then staffing, right? Public safety, we know we're behind. The municipal side and the school side, what happens as we continually gain residents moving forward? And then what's next? So school department final projections, and then our budgets process. So we're doing our level services budget. We'll do a mid-year budget to actual review. We'll do that in January and see where we're at. Hopefully, a lot of our numbers are around 50% of what we've calculated. I have a slightly pessimistic view of that just due to inflation and everything just being out of control right now. It's very difficult for us to keep in line. We're working hard on the capital plan, and we'll be working on that tomorrow. And then we'll start putting together the budget book, which I think was pretty good last year, but I have higher hopes this year. And that is pretty much the entire presentation. I want to take one more second and show you one other thing. If I can do this quickly. So everything we just talked about is a function of this document that we've created. And so when we talk about revenues, this is how we're building our revenue. So I gave you a snapshot in that presentation, and there is a wealth of data to be had throughout this spreadsheet. And what we do is annually we update these numbers, and it feeds back into our current 5-year plan. So it's a pretty cool document. It's really complicated and dense. But the best thing that I like about it is I have a different version that I save on my desktop, and I go around and I change numbers to give me what if scenarios as we're playing with the budget. And that is a really cool function of what we do. The other thing we've just started playing around with, we haven't gotten very far yet, but we're doing an FTE list so that we have a better data set to show residents of changes in employees over time, because we don't really have that. We do, but you got to really dig to get that data out, and it's cumbersome. And then this is what we've been able to pull apart for debt, but you'll see once we get the debt book up and running, that'll be a whole different ball of wax. It's going to be a ton of functionality there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That is all I have for you folks.
That is very cool. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Evan, is there any impact to having increased borrowing rates? Just the interest rates are going up pretty precipitously.
They are. So we don't have any borrowing really in the short term.
Okay.
And so I am hopeful, and it's really just hope, that by the time we have to go out to bond again, we're on the backside of this increase, with the Fed hiking rates to try to control inflation.
Yeah.
We do have some strategies that we can employ to help us with that. So we can do short-term borrowing, which generally has a much lower rate, and we can continue to just recycle that over time. That's not a great long-term strategy, but if we're trying to kick the can 2 years down the road to hopefully get better rates, we've done that in the past, and we can certainly do that now. But yeah, I don't foresee you seeing leasing coming anytime soon. I know, like, the fire department, a lot of their trucks are leased, and I think you're going to see the lease rates just price themselves right out of the market.
Through the roof. Sure.
Yep, that's what I anticipate, and we want to shy away from that a little bit anyway. So that's what we're heading for. But yeah, we're watching it. If we had to go out to bond, this year, I would be really pessimistic.
Right.
Or fiscal 24.
Sure.
But with that HVAC funded through ARPA, that's a real saver in my opinion, because we would be doing the work this year with that ESCO, and then we'd be going out to bond in 24 or maybe early 25, and I think that's going to be even worse in the municipal bond market. So avoiding that and hopefully not having to do any borrowing till 27, 28, 29. As long as we can push it off, the better.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. It's not great.
For the budget,
Yeah.
I have one request, and I don't know if you can do it, but I know you said you're going to be looking mid-year at actual spending to budget.
Mhm.
When we do the budget for next year, because we'll be already in March at that point, right? Is it possible to have people forecast their spending for the current year? So that we have the budget for next year versus the actual spending projection for this year. That's so much more valid information than budget to budget. Because I want to know, what are we actually spending this year, not what did we budget 9 months ago. And you know what I mean? So I don't know if that's possible, like maybe not this year, maybe next year, but just to have those forecasted numbers for the current year would be so helpful.
Yeah, and I think so. The way we can do that to a certain degree is the budget to actuals, right? So we can run a report that shows you what we budgeted, what we spent so far, and how much of the year is left, right? So if you're at, you're 66% of the way, 2/3 of the way through the year, and you've spent 90% of your budget, then there's a likelihood that line's going to go over, and we're going to do that. I will say that generally speaking, the department heads do a really good job of taking let's call it taking the hit and staying within what they've projected. And we really do kind of the last minute transfers as kind of emergent or unrecognized needs.
Okay.
But I think so. Here's what I would say. I think that when we get to the heavy part of the budget rotation, and please remind me to do this, let's get before the finance committee our budget to actuals for the month that you're in.
Okay.
Or the last month that we've closed, because sometimes we're a month behind just because of the volume. And then let's use that as a tool for when you're having conversations with department heads to be able to say, you budgeted 10,000 for this, you're already at 12. How come you're only budgeting 10,000 in fiscal 24?
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And they might say to you, yeah, it's an anomaly. This one thing happened.
Yep.
It COVID and I couldn't get pipe or whatever the heck it is.
Yeah.
They do I will say our staff does a really good job of recognizing those things. I think we have to do a better job of discussing it.
Well, it's discussing those variances
Yep.
just to figure out, what's happening. Is this, like
Sure.
you said, is this a one-off? Is this whatever? So
Yeah, absolutely. So I will do my best to have that data for you, but if
awesome.
it's not there, just please remind me and
I will.
we'll run that report for you. Absolutely.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Is there anything you would like to see the TRICOM do to help support you and these projections?
Not that I can think of offhand. If we really needed to get these projections done. I have the luxury of working with Jay and Anita, and we get along great, and there's really no friction there between the schools and the town. And so, the projections are going to remain transparent, and they're going to change as Jay and I and Anita and Mary work together to refine that data and present it to our respective boards. So I don't think so. I think that the best thing that the folks that sit on TRICOM can do is bring that information back to their boards, but also funnel that information back to Jay and I as needed, so that we can make sure we're giving you the report that you want to see, making sure that we're having conversations with the town side and the school side, because I think that's key. I've only been to school committee once so far. Jay and I could perpetually talk about doing that on a more frequent basis, and then never do, because you meet at the same time as we meet. And so we're always, hyper focused on that. But I think, just keeping that conversation, the whole point is that you folks go back to your respective boards and say, here's what's going on. And
Plus you got a assistant town administrator now.
oh yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Surely he can cover a meeting.
William and I played golf together today, and he was yelled at by his teammate almost the entire day. And while it, I'm sure, that wasn't great. I had a great time. But no, I mean, we're in good shape. I'm really happy with where we are. Again, school department's great in Grafton. It's really a pleasure, and FinCom's great. And so I don't really have anything I need support for, because I'm not up against anything really, to be honest with you. It's we just figure out what we need to do and do it, and then that's it.
Seems like you left out the select board, but whatever. Saying.
No, I'm sorry. That was totally accidental. Yeah, select board's great too. Yeah.
But yeah, schools and FinCom, absolutely.
Yes,
100%.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much
Awesome.
for presenting that again. That was very awesome. And I don't know, what does the TRICOM want to do? I mean, we are obviously take Evan's advice, go back to our respective boards.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
Select board has already seen this, so I don't think it's not a, is that better?
That's
Oh,
better.
no. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
We can hear you.
But I guess I'm just kind of a little lost as what to do going forward. Is this just once a year we hear your presentation and then we go back and report this to our boards? I just want to see what the vision of this committee needs to be.
is it going to be presented at the town meeting, the 5-year plan?
The projections, probably a very refined, probably one slide version of that. Because this is going to sound bad, and I'm big on transparency, so don't take this the wrong way, but a lot of times at town meeting, too much information is worse than not enough information.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because people, it's data they haven't looked at,
Yeah.
and it's a lot to understand in a short amount of time. And
Right.
I feel people get lost. So I'll probably do a boiled down slide about, our future financial stability, i.e. 5-year projections. But it won't be anything like what we did tonight.
Okay. And then direct people to the plan.
Yes, and this plan will be, I'm gonna include either this PowerPoint or there will be multiple pages similar to this that will carry our 5-year projections on the budget book. So
Okay.
you'll be able to get all of that data right there. I'm hopeful that the budget book has a better way for integration, which I think it does, and I didn't use it last year because we didn't have this.
Yeah.
But I honestly haven't even started compiling the budget book yet.
Okay. Awesome. Good job.
Thank you.
So,
Glad to
you
hear
know,
that there's a plan.
Colin, I think, one of the other potential things, we could use TRICOM for is, and we kind of used a committee for this, but where we have things like ARPA funds available, just discussing priorities and, that kind of stuff. So presumably the schools are pretty happy with the process we went through and the way we've spent, we've allocated those funds. But anytime we get a windfall like that and potentially have to make decisions about, just prioritization, makes sense that TRICOM would be involved.
All right. Well, the next thing on the agenda was going to be discussing future agenda items and meeting dates. So do you guys have anything like that in mind, or is this just kind of temporarily on hold unless we get a windfall, or, what do you guys want to do?
Yeah, I think we wait till something else comes up.
Okay. Okay. Well, that works for me. We do have a set of meeting minutes that Matt was good enough to put together for us from March 10th. If I can get a motion to approve those. Oh no, am I breaking up again?
Yep.
Matt, do you want to take over this? Breaking up.
Yeah, hang on a second. Let's see.
The meeting date was March 10th, and I think you sent them out in July sometime.
Did the rest of the committee get them?
I have not seen.
I sent two sets to you, Colleen. It's okay.
Okay.
We can either put together a quick meeting to just approve minutes at some point, or we'll just wait till the next one. So why don't we just wait till the next one, and I'll send out drafts after I do the minutes for this meeting, so that you all have a chance to review, and then whenever we get together again, we can do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Well, if that's it, I can take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion made and seconded. All those in favor by roll call, Lyra,
Aye.
Matt,
Aye.
Angelina,
Bye.
Graciela, hi, Evan.
Oh, I'm a voting. I don't think I'm a voting member. am I?
Are you? I
You
thought
are
you
now.
and Jay were on TRICOM.
Well, I mean, obviously to adjourn, aye, but I don't think I don't think I
I'll have
don't
to
think
check.
I actually have a vote.
I think you're in though. All right, Colleen is I too. All right, good night, everybody.